In the wake of the Titans, we find the ruins of the past and the blueprints for a brand new future. Join us as we explore the legacies of greatness and the stories of those who dared to lead. Subscribe now and follow the path of the legends today.
I didn't cry. I didn't pack a bag and rush home. I just sat at my desk, read my sister's text one more time, and said, out loud to no one, okay. Because my plan was already running. Let me back up. I've been the responsible one my whole life. Not in the way people say it as a compliment. They say it the way you'd describe a piece of furniture that's always in the right place and never complains about it. Useful, dependable, easy to forget until you need it. My parents had 3 kids. My brother got out early, moved to Seattle for grad school, and built his own life with what I can only describe as impressive speed. Smart man, I stayed. Not because I didn't have options, but because I actually loved my hometown. I loved the old part of it, the neighborhoods with the wide porches and the maple trees that turned the color of fire every October. I had a plan. I'd been building toward it since I was 22 years old, waitressing double shifts and taking online bookkeeping courses and saving every dollar I wasn't handing to my family. Because yes, I was handing money to my family. My sister is 4 years younger than me. She's the kind of pretty that people describe as delicate. Small features, big eyes, the sort of face that makes strangers want to help her carry things. My parents adored her. That's not bitterness talking, it's just the truth. When she wanted to study fashion merchandising, they helped with tuition. When that didn't work out, they helped with her move to a nicer apartment. When that relationship fell apart, they helped with that too, and the next one, and the one after that. And when the money ran thin, they called me. I never said no. That's on me. I told myself it was family, that it was temporary, that one day the dynamic would shift and everyone would find their footing and I'd be free to focus on my own life. I kept telling myself that for 6 years. What I was building, through all of it, was a photography studio. Not the kind with a white backdrop and a ring light for headshots. I mean a real working space, a place for editorial shoots, for small commercial clients, for the kind of portrait work that takes 4 hours of prep and produces something that belongs on a wall. I'd been shooting since I was 17. By my late 20s, I had a real portfolio and a list of clients who sent referrals. What I didn't have was a permanent space. I'd been renting by the hour at a shared facility across town, and the logistics were grinding me down. Then the building on Archer Street came available. It was a former tailor shop on the ground floor of a brick building that had been on the historic register since 1987. Original tin ceilings, wide plank floors, a north-facing skylight that produced the most extraordinary natural light I had ever worked under. The space was 500 square feet and had been empty for 2 years. The landlord, a quiet man in his 60s named Mr. Calhoun, had been waiting for the right tenant. We talked for 3 hours the first afternoon I came to see it. By the time I left, I had a handshake agreement and a move-in date. I spent 8 months on the build-out. I did most of the non-structural work myself, on weekends, after client sessions, before dawn sometimes. I refinished the floors. I had the tin ceiling cleaned and sealed. I built a small client lounge in the back corner, with 2 chairs I found at an estate sale and reupholstered in a dusty green velvet. I had proper electrical run for my lighting rigs. I got my business license, my liability insurance, my permits, all of it, every single box checked, because I'd read enough horror stories to know that cutting corners was not something I was willing to do. I named it simply, my last name and the word studio. Clean, professional, mine. The week before I was set to open officially, I got the video call from my sister. She was in our parents' kitchen. I could see the yellow walls behind her, the same rooster clock above the sink that had been there since I was in middle school. She was smiling in a way that didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. "We need to talk about the studio," she said. I thought she was calling to congratulate me. I actually thought that. "I've been thinking," she said, and I talked to Mom and Dad, and we all think it makes more sense for me to take over the space. I've been developing my concept for a vintage clothing boutique for almost a year now, and I really need a physical location with character. Your space has exactly the right aesthetic. The tin ceiling, the floors, it photographs beautifully for content. I've already talked to Mr. Calhoun. I remember the exact feeling in my chest, not anger. Something quieter and colder than anger. "You talked to Mr. Calhoun," I said. He was very receptive. He said he'd be open to reassigning the lease if you agreed to step back. Mom and Dad think this is the right move for the family. You can shoot anywhere. Honestly, you don't even need a dedicated space. But my boutique needs a specific kind of location, and this is it. She said, this is it. The way people say something has already been decided. And the 8 months of work I put into it, I said. The flooring, the electrical, the ceiling. That'll actually be an asset for my shop. Good bones, you know. It would have cost me a fortune to do that from scratch. She paused. I'm telling you as a courtesy. Mom and Dad are supportive. We just need you to be on board. I could hear my mother's voice in the background. Not words, just the murmur of agreement that had followed my sister her entire life. I said, let me think about it. Don't take too long, she said. I want to start bringing in inventory next week. I hung up. I did not call Mr. Calhoun that night. I did not call my parents. I did not send a single text. I opened my laptop, made a cup of tea, and spent 2 hours on the phone with my attorney, a woman named Ms. Waverly, who I had hired 18 months earlier, specifically to handle the legal structure of the studio. Here is what my sister did not know. 3 weeks before that call, I had transferred all of my equipment, cameras, lenses, lighting rigs, backdrops, every piece of gear, to a storage unit I'd rented under my LLC. I hadn't done this because I'd anticipated her specifically. I'd done it because I'd started quietly looking at a second location, a larger space that had come available 2 blocks away, and I'd wanted to be ready to move quickly if the deal came together. As a side effect, the studio on Archer Street was now essentially an empty room with good bones and my name on the lease. Just my name, rock solid, 6 months paid in advance, with a clause that required 60 days written notice from either party to initiate any lease transfer discussion. Ms. Waverly had insisted on that language. I thought it was excessive at the time. I did not correct my sister's impression that the space was full of my things. I did not tell her the lease had that clause. I did not mention that I had already been in preliminary conversations with a second location. I said, let me think about it, and I meant let me let you walk straight into this. She moved fast. I'll give her that. Within 4 days, she had told everyone she knew about the boutique. She posted about it on her social media, so excited to announce my new venture, details coming soon, and tagged the building's address. She put together a mood board and emailed it to me, unprompted, with a subject line that said, The Vision, with a smiley face. My parents called to tell me how proud they were of her initiative and how they hoped I'd be generous about the transition. You've always been the practical one, my mother said. You'll land on your feet. You always do. I said, I know. My sister made one mistake that turned a manageable situation into an irreversible one. She went to Mr. Calhoun and told him the lease transfer was happening, that I had agreed, and that she needed access to begin her build-out. Mr. Calhoun, who is a decent man but not particularly confrontational, said he'd need documentation from me. She told him it was a family matter and documentation would follow. He called me. I told him calmly that I had not agreed to anything and that he should not grant access under any circumstances until he had written documentation from me personally. He was deeply relieved to have a reason not to get involved. We agreed that if anyone else approached him, he would direct them to my attorney. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. The following Saturday morning, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened to it, it was the building manager, not Mr. Calhoun, but the property management company that handled the building maintenance, saying that a woman had arrived with 2 men and a pickup truck and had asked for access to the ground floor unit and he didn't know what to do. I was 3 hours away at that point, in the city for a client session. I did not drive home. I sent a text to the building manager with Ms. Waverly's contact information and the words, Please direct all requests to this number. Do not grant access. This is an active legal matter. Then I finished my client session. I shot for 4 hours. I ate lunch. I answered emails. I know how that sounds. People ask me later how I could just carry on like nothing was happening. Here's the thing. Something was happening. Something very specific. My sister was at an empty building with a rental truck full of vintage clothing, no legal right to enter, no lease, no documentation, and about to make every single one of her next moves on record. I didn't need to be there. I needed to be exactly where I was, doing exactly what I was doing, with my location and timestamp on my client invoice and nowhere near whatever was unfolding on Archer Street. My sister called me at 2014 in the afternoon. I let it ring. She called again at 2:31. I let it ring. She texted, "We're outside. Where are you? This is ridiculous. I've got people here." I texted back, "I'm with a client. I haven't agreed to any lease transfer. You should go home." She called our mother. "Our mother called me," I answered. "She's standing outside in the cold with those men she hired," my mother said. "This is humiliating for her. You're doing this on purpose." "I'm working," I said. I told her I hadn't agreed to anything. "You said you'd think about it." "I thought about it. The answer is no." There was a long pause. My mother's voice, when it came back, had dropped into the register she used when she wanted to sound wounded. "This is very selfish. Your sister has put a lot of work into this plan." "She put together a mood board," I said. "I spent 8 months building that space. I have a lease. I have a business. The answer is no." I hung up. I want to be honest about what happened next in my chest. It wasn't triumph. It was something more like grief, the kind that comes not from loss, but from finally seeing something clearly that you'd been blurring for years. I'd spent a long time telling myself that my family was well-meaning but misguided, that my sister was thoughtless but not cruel, that my parents played favorites but didn't understand the real consequences. And maybe some of that was true. But what was also true was that she had stood in front of my unlocked door with a rental truck and assumed it would open for her, and my parents had stood behind her and agreed, and not one of them had ever once asked what it cost me to keep being the one who bent. I drove home that evening. I stopped at a hardware store and bought a new deadbolt. I installed it myself. The following week, my sister launched a social media campaign announcing the boutique opening. She had a location. She had a date. She had an aesthetic palette and a hashtag and an announcement that the space was currently under preparation. She had not spoken to me since the Saturday she showed up with the truck. She had, however, told everyone in our extended family that I was being difficult and withholding a space I wasn't even using. My aunt called to mediate. My cousin sent a long text about the importance of supporting women in business. A family friend who I hadn't spoken to in 3 years emailed to say that she hoped I'd find it in my heart to help my sister get started. I forwarded everything to Miss Waverly and said, "Document." Here's the thing about letting someone run confidently toward a wall. You have to have the nerve to watch them do it. You can't flinch. You can't warn them because they won't hear a warning and they'll use your attempt to warn them as evidence that you're the obstacle. You have to stand exactly where you are and let the wall be the wall. My sister posted a reel on a Tuesday, showing herself walking through what she called her new boutique space. It was clearly shot inside Archer Street. The tin ceiling was unmistakable. The north light, the green velvet chairs I'd left behind when I moved my equipment out. I still had a key. She had a key. How did she have a key? I called the building manager. Apparently there was a spare key in the property management lockbox that she had accessed by claiming to be handling the transition for the tenant. The building manager had not checked with me. He was apologetic. I was specific, change the lockbox code. Document this conversation, send me a written summary. Ms. Waverly sent a formal letter the next morning. Cease and desist, unauthorized entry, demand to vacate, notice that any modification to the property would be pursued as property damage under the terms of the lease. It was 6 pages. It used words like injunctive relief and consequential damages. My sister called me screaming. Not her usual dramatic upset, actually screaming. "You're going to make me a criminal over some empty room? I didn't touch anything. I just walked through it for a video." "You entered a leased commercial property without the tenant's permission," I said. "That's the definition of what you did." "This is insane. This is a family space." "It's not a family space. It's my space. I pay for it. My name is on the lease. You don't have permission to be there." "Mom and Dad are going to." "I know," I said, and I did know. I knew exactly what they were going to do. I had been accounting for it the whole time. That's their choice. She hung up. My parents called that evening and told me they were revoking the informal loan arrangement, the money they owed me, which we had never formalized but which they had been slowly, occasionally paying back, and that I should not expect any further repayment. I think they meant it as a threat. The number was small enough that it stung more as a symbol than a loss. What they didn't know was that Ms. Waverly had also been quietly helping me document that loan arrangement for the past 4 months with every text and Venmo receipt and email I'd kept in case it ever became relevant. I said, I understand, and I meant that's going in the file too. Here is when the plan I hadn't told anyone about became real. The second location, the larger space 2 blocks away, on a corner with a separate entrance and a small parking lot, came through. I signed the lease on a Thursday. The move-in date was 6 weeks out. I had 6 weeks during which I was paying for both spaces, which was tight but manageable, and during which Archer Street would sit empty and locked with my name on it, generating nothing for anyone. I could have just waited. I could have let the lease run out and let the whole thing dissolve. Instead, I called Mr. Calhoun. I told him that I was planning to transition out of the Archer Street space at the end of my current lease term. I told him I did not recommend my sister as a tenant, for reasons I was happy to put in writing. I told him that I would be willing to negotiate an early release from the lease 90 days early in exchange for the return of my security deposit and a mutual release of claims. He agreed immediately. He did not want a legal situation in his building. The signed release came through on a Friday afternoon. That evening, I texted my sister. The lease on Archer Street has been released. Mr. Calhoun is free to offer it to you directly. You should contact him Monday morning. I sent it and put my phone face down on the table. What I knew that she didn't, the lease I'd just released came with the full disclosure of building history that Mr. Calhoun was legally required to provide to any new commercial tenant under state law. That history included the fact that the building had been flagged during its last municipal inspection, the one that had happened 4 months before I first moved in, for several structural items that the owner had agreed to address on a specific remediation timeline. Most had been addressed. One had not, a section of load-bearing substructure in the back corner of the ground floor beneath the area where I had placed the green velvet chairs. The issue was not dangerous under normal occupancy. It was flagged as incompatible with any renovation that increased floor load in that zone. The boutique she'd been planning involved custom floor-to-ceiling shelving built into that back corner. I knew this because I had asked Mr. Calhoun about it carefully during the lease negotiation before I moved a single piece of equipment into the space. I had built my studio around that corner instead of into it. I had placed 2 lightweight chairs there and nothing else. My sister would not know to ask. She hadn't spent 8 months learning that building. She'd spent a weekend making a mood board. I didn't tell her. I didn't warn her. I had no obligation to. The disclosure would come from Mr. Calhoun as required by law when she signed her own lease. She called me on a Monday almost vibrating with victory. She'd talked to Mr. Calhoun. She was getting the space. She just wanted me to know that it all worked out. I said, I'm glad. She paused, apparently surprised I didn't sound devastated. The opening is in 6 weeks. Good luck with it, I said. I meant it in the hollow way you mean things that you've already moved past. The opening was on a Saturday. I was 3 miles away, setting up my new studio, when my phone started going. First a text from my cousin, is everything okay with your sister? Then a DM from a photographer I knew who followed her social media, saw some drama on her stories. You okay? Then a call from my aunt that I did not answer. I looked at my sister's page from a client's Instagram story that afternoon and found out what had happened. She had been mid-setup, the day before the opening, when the building inspector had arrived. Not because anyone had called, but because the remediation timeline on that flagged structural item had come due, and the municipal inspector had a scheduled follow-up visit on record. The inspector had looked at the custom shelving brackets her contractor had lag-bolted into the back corner framing. The opening was postponed pending structural review. The contractor, it emerged, had been given the job without being shown the building disclosure. My sister had not read the disclosure. The pages from Mr. Calhoun's legally required documentation had been in the folder she'd signed at closing. She told anyone who would listen that it was a lot of paperwork and she hadn't gone through all of it. She did what people do when they need someone to blame. She called me. You knew, she said. You knew about that corner and you said nothing. I learned about the building before I moved in, I said. That's what due diligence is. The disclosure was in your lease documents. Mr. Calhoun is required by law to provide it. You knew I didn't know. I'm not responsible for what you read or didn't read before you signed a lease. This is sabotage. You walked into a building you'd never studied with a contractor you'd never vetted, and you signed paperwork you didn't read, I said. That's not sabotage. That's a consequence. She was crying by then, or doing the sound of crying. I've never been entirely sure with her. Do you know how much money I've already spent? The inventory, the contractor, the promotional materials. I know, I said, and I did know. I knew exactly what it felt like to spend money on something and have it taken from you, to pour time and work into something and watch someone else decide they deserved it more. I had felt that. I had sat with that feeling for a long time. The difference was that what had happened to me had been deliberate. What had happened to her was the result of her own certainty that she could skip the steps. I didn't say any of that. I said, I hope you're able to work it out with the contractor. She hung up. My parents called. My father spoke first, which was unusual. He normally left the family negotiations to my mother. He told me that what I'd done was unforgivable, that I had watched my sister walk into a disaster and said nothing, that I had put my legalism above my family. I said, I didn't know she was going to skip the disclosure documents. That was her decision. You could have warned her. I could have, I said, but she didn't ask me. She told me it all worked out. She called me to crow about getting the space. At no point did she say, hey, is there anything I should know about the building? I have spent years being the person in this family who holds information and warnings and fixes and money, and I have been asked, consistently, to just hand it over on demand. I didn't demand anything from her. I left the building, I released the lease, and I let her handle her own business. That's what everyone wanted. My father was quiet for a long time. My mother said, that's very cold. I know, I said. They ended the call. I went back to setting up my new studio. The space was bigger than Archer Street, twice the square footage, with a secondary shooting area I'd been dreaming about for 2 years. The north light was different here, not quite as perfect, but I had the parking lot and the corner entrance and the room to grow. I had 3 new clients already booked for the first month. I had a full equipment list that lived in my LLC, protected. A woman named Priya had been my studio assistant at the shared facility for 2 years. She was 24, meticulous, and had been doing 90% of her job on a contractor's hourly rate that I knew was not enough. When I signed a new lease, I called her and offered her a real position, part-time to start, with health benefits at 6 months. She cried a little on the phone and then apologized for crying, and I told her not to apologize. The boutique situation resolved itself, eventually, in the way these things do. The structural issue turned out to be repairable. It took 6 weeks and was not catastrophic, just expensive. My sister opened the boutique 2 months late. I don't know if it's doing well. I don't follow her page anymore. My parents have not apologized. I didn't expect them to. I have a relationship with them that is cordial and bounded now, which is a different thing than what we had before, but, I think, more honest. We talk about surface things. We do not talk about money or the studio or my sister's business. That is a choice I made, and I'm not going to pretend it doesn't cost something, because it does. Families are not logic problems. You can be completely right and still feel the loss of the thing you thought you had. But here's what I have instead. I have 450 square feet on Archer Street in someone else's problem, and I have a lease on a corner studio that is mine in every way that matters, legally, financially, structurally. I have Priya, who brings coffee on Monday mornings and keeps my booking system in a state I could never have managed alone. I have clients who send other clients. I have work that I made with my hands and my time and my specific, hard-won knowledge of how buildings work and what paperwork means and why you read every page before you sign. My sister called me 3 months later. She said she wanted to clear the air. I let her talk. She said she was sorry for the way things happened, but that she still thought I should have said something about the building. I told her that I understood she felt that way. She asked if we could have lunch. I said maybe, sometime. I meant, not yet, maybe not ever. I don't know. What I do know is this. I spent years being the furniture in my own life, useful, reliable, easy to move around when someone else needed the space. I let myself be positioned and repositioned without ever planting my feet and saying, this is where I stand, this is what I built, this is mine. I know it now. You wanted the space. I let you find out what that actually meant. I think about the moment I installed that new deadbolt a lot. Not the legal letters, not the inspector showing up, not my sister's voice going high and cracked on the phone. Just that quiet Saturday evening, a screwdriver in my hand, replacing a lock on a door I had every right to lock. It was such a small thing, but it was the first time in years I had done something purely because it was mine to do, without calculating how my family would receive it, without bracing for the call. That's the thing nobody tells you about being the responsible one. The cost isn't just money or time. It's the habit you build, slowly, of treating your own life as negotiable, of assuming that if something matters to you, that's almost a reason to hold it loosely, because someone will eventually ask for it and you've been trained to say yes. I did that for 6 years. I said yes with money, and yes with silence, and yes with the particular exhaustion of a person who keeps the lights on and never asks why her name isn't on the switch. What changed wasn't that I got angry. Anger I'd had plenty of in the quiet way, the kind that lives in your chest and doesn't come out because you've told yourself it isn't useful. What changed was that I started thinking clearly. I read the lease language, I kept the receipts. I asked Ms. Waverly the uncomfortable questions before I needed the answers. That's not coldness. That's what it looks like when someone finally decides that understanding the rules of a situation is not optional, that intelligence applied to your own circumstances is an act of self-respect, not aggression. And the nerve it took to wait, to not run home when my sister showed up with a truck, to finish the client session, eat lunch, answer emails. People called that calculating. I called it finishing what I started. There is a kind of endurance that doesn't look dramatic from the outside. It just looks like someone going about her day while everything is on the line. Priya didn't know any of it was happening when she showed up that Monday. I hadn't told anyone. I just kept working because the work was the point and because falling apart in the middle of it would have cost me everything I'd built. My sister got her consequence not because I engineered it, but because she skipped the steps. The disclosure was in the folder. Mr. Calhoun handed it to her as required. She signed without reading. That is a choice, and choices accumulate into outcomes, not as punishment, not as fate, but as the straightforward arithmetic of how things work. You cannot build something real on assumptions about what other people will absorb on your behalf. It catches up. It always does. What I want, if I'm honest, is for her to understand that, not to suffer. I don't need that. I need her to learn that the steps exist for a reason. That due diligence is not bureaucracy. It's respect for what you're attempting. That you don't get to shortcut the work and inherit the result of someone else's labor and call it opportunity. I don't know if she'll get there. That's not mine to control. What's mine is this: a corner studio with a parking lot and a north-facing window and Priya's coffee on Monday mornings, and a client list I built name by name over 10 years. What's mine is the knowledge that I read every page, asked every question, and planted my feet when it counted. You can call that cold, I call it finally, knowing where I stand,